wasn't until 1921 that we have the right for women to vote and things like that, which is kind of odd. And this year, we see a big rollback in those laws in terms of abortions and things like that. And the great fear, of course, is that if you roll back women's rights, then, of course, next on the chopping block, of course, be minority rights, particularly African-American. And then we saw that, the first part of that, with the Supreme Court of the United States attacking affirmative action. And so now, a right for affirmative action that was just granted recently, now we're in the process of eliminating those rights. And so, having said that, first we have our elected prosecutor, Ryan Mears, who's been doing an outstanding job for the citizens of Marion County. We have some difficult circumstances. We're going to talk about some of the issues in law enforcement because I wanted you to hear it straight, because I know a lot of time when I'm out and about in the neighborhood, folks, you come up to me and talk about different issues, but what has been in front and center in our city lately, we see a lot of political advertisement. And I'm going to talk about local issues today because I see so many TV ads, and it troubles me when I see these ads on TV, and it's tantamount to false advertisement. And so I think we will talk about a few of these issues today, starting with our prosecutor. Mr. Mears, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. I appreciate you having me on again. It's always good to talk with you and your audience.
Yeah, so we started off last week, and we also have our Deputy Chief, Kendall Adams, but we started off talking about this issue of gun violence and in our city. And first, can you give us our audience, our listener audience, a background on this gun legislation, how it affected you in the prosecutor's office?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that both the prosecutor's office and law enforcement is facing right now is the fact that anybody can walk around with a gun. And not only, when you have legislation that actively encourages people to publicly carry firearms, it changes the dynamic of every law enforcement interaction. But even more than that, it changes the dynamic of every interaction that people in our community have. And, one of the things that we see as it relates to violent crime is we're seeing more and more people become involved in the criminal justice system, involved in violence, not because they're out there robbing people, not because they're involved in burglaries, but because they're getting simple dispute and simple arguments with people, but they have that firearm on their hip, and it definitely provides them, everybody gets a little bit more courageous when they have that gun. Everybody gets a little bit tougher, and we're seeing too many of these situations result in gun violence. And I think that's one of the things that's frustrating to the prosecutor's office, that's frustrating to IMPD and to the community as a whole, is a lot of this violence is really just senseless acts of people, taking matters into their own hands, using gun violence because it's easy and convenient, because it's on their hip. And that's the part that's discouraging to us. There's a lot of talk about we need to get resources to people and things of that nature. A lot of these things aren't driven by resources, and some of the traditional issues we see that's traditionally associated with why people end up in the criminal justice system. It's just people making poor choices who have access to a firearm. And I don't know what law enforcement can do given the current structure of the Indiana Code.
Well, let's talk. Kendall Adams is Deputy Chief Adams. This law that the prosecutor talked about, how does it affect law enforcement safety?
Well, thanks for having me, Nate. Appreciate being here. Always appreciate talking to your audience, and always enjoy sitting with the prosecutor. Every time I sit with him, I learn something different about his passion, his ability to navigate these systems and really advocate on behalf of our community. So, yeah, Nate, the reality is since July, since the passage of the law, it has made it extremely difficult for us to, I would say, be proactive one of the things we were trying to do as law enforcement is get away from just being reactive. I often tell people, and I tell my own detectives, if you commit a crime here and we can identify you, we're one of the best law enforcement agencies in the country at chasing you down. Where we struggle as a community is trying to get in front of these things, and struggle as a law enforcement community is we struggle at trying to get in front of these things before they happen, trying to be preventative. So since the passage of the law, it's just made it much more difficult for us to determine who's prohibited, who's not prohibited. It took away a tool. At least before, we could say, hey, you have to have a license, right? And so we could stop you for reasonable suspicion, see if you had a license. If you had a license, you were good to go. Now we don't have that ability. We almost have to be reactive in a sense that something has to occur, and then we have to find out if you're prohibited. And the way to find out you're prohibited is even more of a challenge. As you talk about juveniles, which we have no access to juvenile records. It is frustrating for law enforcement, and it just continues to make the job harder. And you think about the passage of that law in the middle of the crisis that we were struggling with as a community, which is gun violence. So I just and I get it. People will say that, people who weren't obeying the law aren't going to obey, the law now. And I get that. And I fully understand that. I mean, folks are not going to follow law if they're going to break the law, criminals. So, but one of the things I worry about, as a prosecutor alluded to, was, now everybody can have a gun 18 and above. Not everybody, but you get my point. The access to guns at 18 and above is much more readily available. I worry about, as prosecutor mentioned earlier, you have a kid at school that got in a fight with somebody. Now he's got the ability with relatively ease to perpetrate violence in a school setting. So I really worry about those scenarios as well, because what we've done is just make guns more accessible in our state, and that's a travesty, particularly here in Marion County. It may not be an issue in other counties, but here in Marion County, that's just a travesty, and the fact that state legislation didn't give us the ability here in Marion County to do more to curb the issues that we find here is just really appalling.
Well, the problem we have, so what we're not saying is that the state legislature is controlled by a supermajority of Republican legislators, and these laws, now we have a gentleman running for mayor who is saying that he's running on a crime type spree type advertisement. And what's troubling me about this is that these crazy gun laws that they pass is what is the principal cause of the problem. It's sort of like you say that you make a certain type of drug legal, and then you complain because people start dying because of the drug. And so we have a situation now that I don't think most people recognize because it's a state law. And I was shocked when this law first took effect, when I went to a gas station only to see everybody's having a gun publicly shown. And what bothers me, though, more than anything else, I now see more and more people carrying guns in places such as grocery stores and things like that. But let's talk about the other part of this. In terms of homicide, we have different types that I see. First, domestic type homicide, where you have boyfriend, husband, wife, end up in a violent confrontation. What can be done from a law enforcement standpoint, if anything, to get ahead of these type of crimes?
Yeah, Nate. I mean, domestic violence is always a challenge for not only law enforcement community, our community in general. And so, one of the things that I know we really try to get across to victims is one, there are a number. Domestic violence is a cycle, and it will continue to repeat if you don't intercede, either in arrest or getting someone intervention, a victim getting them intervention and getting them out of that cycle. But it is a very difficult challenge for law enforcement. I know we've as a law enforcement agent, we focused on the enforcement side, We have a group of community partners to include law enforcement, Marion County Sheriff's Office, Prosecutor's Office, the DV Champions, Julian Center, DVN. So all of these partners meet monthly, and we talk about these cases where there is potential for repeated violence and offenders that may be outstanding in terms of have warrants or on probation that we can try to intervene. But so on the law enforcement side, we're trying to figure out what can we do to either enhance their potential penalty, or what can we do to essentially chase them down. But the services side is trying to intervene with the victims and get them help. And so just as intensely as we're going after the offender, we're having conversations with the service side to see what we can do with the victims. And then lastly, one of the things that we've seen across our country is this restorative justice approach where we're talking with both our community and we're talking with the offenders. So instead of just punishment, we're trying to really get the offender some services so that they can hopefully realize their ways and change their behavior. So I know there's a couple of things that, in terms of domestic violence, we always see, unfortunately, we see usually about 10 to 12 homicides related to domestic violence. Typically every year, we really are. We've had 3 enforcement operations around domestic violence. We'll have a third one coming up here in the month of October, where we really look at level 3 and higher felonies and outstanding warrants or protective orders that need to be served. And so we'll, as a law enforcement agency, we'll be going after those offenders and then partnering with Office of Public Health and Safety and the DV Champions to really try to get these victims some services. And as we head into October, which is DV Domestic Violence Month, it'll be a big focus for law enforcement.
Prosecutor Mears, tell us about what, from a prosecutor standpoint, what can be done to curb this? What, if anything, do you have in place, or what type of emphasis you place on these type cases in your office?
Well, I think the first thing is it's important for all of us to recognize that one of the toughest cycles in the world to break is to break the cycle of domestic violence. And so we need to make sure that we are consistently there to support individuals who are involved in these relationships. And so when they do get to that point, when they're ready to leave, that all of us are there to wrap our arms around them and try to help people. I think the other part of it too is just, one of the things that we try to do as an office and as an agency is we need to educate the public about what a domestic violence relationship is. What are some of the signs, so people can, who are friends, who are family, maybe can do a better job of identifying, hey, this is an unhealthy relationship, and offer that support before it becomes too late. So I think part of it is being proactive and trying to help the community and people understand what those relationships look like, and how you as a friend, as a neighbor, as a relative can intervene in a positive way that will hopefully have a positive impact, not only on the relationship, but helping get people out of those domestic violence relationships when that person is ready. I think the second part of it, though, is the enforcement side, and there always has to be enforcement. I think one of the challenges that we have as a prosecutor's office is a lot of times people call the police respond, and then maybe they don't want to move forward with the case. And so what you really try to do is, when we have that intervention point, when we have that individual that we're able to connect with, it really is about, hey, this is what we can do to help you. This is what services we can offer to you. And a lot of times people are in these relationships because they feel it's out of necessity. Who's going to pay my bills? Who's going to pick up my kids? I can't do it without this other person. And so it's really about helping people understand that they do have options and that alternatives are available, and trying to get people hooked up with the resources that they need. And so I think a lot of it is about us as a community creating an environment where people feel comfortable leaving those relationships. They feel like there's going to be a safety net there to help support them as they make the choice to move on from that relationship. And then the reality is, at the end of the day, there also has to be enforcement. And there's some people who need to go to jail because they're all too comfortable putting their hands on a woman. and that just doesn't have any place in our society and in our community. And there also has to be a very vibrant enforcement mechanism relating to these domestic violence cases.
Well, the next issue in terms of crime that I want to cover dealt with the proliferation of drugs in our community. We don't make those, but they infiltrate our community, and I see it on TV every day that it leads to violent crime. First, we talked to Deputy Chief Adams. What is being done to try to curb this tide of drugs coming into our community, and what can citizens do to help alleviate the process of this continuing sore or scar in our community because it leads to violent crime?
Yeah, Nate, it's a good question. I mean, that's a battle that since my 26-year career, we continued to try to attack. When we look at our strategy around enforcement and narcotics, we really try to take out the very top. If you recall, just a couple of weeks ago, we partnered with our federal partners at the FBI to take down a large drug trafficking organization. We find that when we're able to intervene at such a large scale and kind of take off the head, that we have much more success in reducing narcotic flow in our community. We'll continue to find ways to intervene at a large scale as opposed to the smaller scale. It's not that we're not enforcing at a lower level, but what we find is the users typically are sick, and there's not much law enforcement can do to try to intervene in that particular scenario. But if we can, as you talked about, take out the distribution of drugs in our community, hopefully services can come in and try to rehabilitate those that are using. So, I know one of the efforts we'll be undertaking here is around fentanyl. We talked to nauseum about the impact of fentanyl in our community. Upwards of 900 so-called deaths contributed to fentanyl. Just a small amount of fentanyl can be very lethal. And so, prior, a few years back, we didn't really have a good strategy around overdose deaths. Now we do. We have upwards of 25 detectives that will respond with the coroner's office. And we've been successful with the prosecutor's office in pushing a few cases forward for dealing with causing death. So because we've had some success there, we're going to see if we can dedicate a team so that people in our community who deal fentanyl know that there quite possibly could be some consequences. And so we'll continue to, number one, partner with our federal partners to take down large DTOs, or what we call drug trafficking organizations. We'll continue to enhance our ability to look at fentanyl deaths through our collaboration with our federal partners and our local efforts. And then lastly, we'll continue to try to educate our community around the effects of illicit drugs and trying to get those users that are maybe sick, try to get them help so that they can recover.
Our prosecutor, now this is a difficult task I see for prosecution, because one of the problems you run into when you have drug activity is a form of organized crime. When you have that, there's a great deal of fear and intimidation. So good taxpaying honest citizens are sometimes afraid to come forward to identify or participate in the criminal justice system in fear of retaliation. What is the process in the prosecutor's office for dealing with these type of issues, particularly when dealing with narcotics that's permeating our community now?
Well, first of all, I'm so glad you brought up this topic, because I feel like there's not enough discussion around it. And just to give a quick plug for the Marion County Prosecutors Community Justice Academy, on Wednesday, we're actually doing a full-blown talk on this issue of fentanyl in our community and these causing death cases. And we've been very successful in terms of being able to prosecute that. I think Kendall is going to be a part of that. The DEA is also going to participate in that. And that's really going to be us having this conversation with the community about the scope of the challenge we're facing, but also some of the proactive things that we're trying to do to address the fact that we have people in our community who are literally pushing poison on people that is resulting in people losing their lives unnecessarily because they're taking this poison, and oftentimes they don't even know what they're taking. And so I think it's one of the most pressing issues we have in our community. If you look at the overdose numbers, they're unacceptable. If you look at the number of people who have lost their life as a result of using narcotics, it's unacceptable. And as a consequence of people being involved in the drug trade, there's also violence that surrounds that as well. So we have got to get our arms around this. We need to use every tool that we have. I can tell you, since I've been prosecutor, this is the most cooperation we have ever had from the DEA. They've been very active, very engaged on this issue. The number one most filed case in major felony courts in Marion County are drug-related cases. So we're filing a ton of these cases. But, it's one of those problems that we have to really have a 360-degree approach on. We have to be willing to address the end users. We have to make sure we're using resources to help them. We also have to make sure, though, that we're being very aggressive as it relates to making sure that on the enforcement side that we're able to hold people accountable. You mentioned the fact that what can people in the community do? I will tell you, when I'm out in the community, and I know Chief Adams has been with me when we've had these conversations, people always come up to me and say, hey, I don't want my name on any paper, but I just want to let you know my neighbor or the person around the corner is dealing. There has to be something we can do. They give us that information. And I have to give a lot of credit to IMPD on a lot of those cases. They have followed up and put together and done proactive cases, launched proactive investigations into those locations. And so the one thing I would tell people is, if there's activity going on in your neighborhood and you don't want to necessarily be the one to say, hey, this is what's going on, or you don't want to be the person mentioned in a police report or a probable cause affidavit, if you contact either IMPD or the prosecutor's office, we'll get that information to the right into the right hands, and we can initiate an investigation, and your name's not going to be found anywhere. I would say it's probably the second or third most asked about thing when I'm out in the community is people saying, hey, there's this guy on my street who's doing X. And so there are ways that we can protect your identity. And a lot of times what we need is we just need a head start. We need to be able to identify who are the people who are causing these problems in our community. And like I said, I think Deputy Chief Adams has been very receptive when we've given him that information and devoted resources to making sure that IMPD is following up on those locations. So there's a lot of ways people can provide that information anonymously. We'll make sure that we follow up. But I think we all need to be very honest and realistic about the problems that fentanyl is causing in our community and the danger that it approaches, or that it poses to our community. And we've got to continue to be proactive on dealing with these issues because we're seeing too many people lose their life as a result of drugs. And those are just some of the most heartbreaking conversations you have, because a lot of times people had no idea what they were taking or what they were ingesting.
And one final issue about the drug usage, do we have locally, like any type of witness protection program, if a person want to be involved and they have to actually testify against a person who are selling narcotics in our community? Like the federal system have witness protection program. Do we have money in our budget for a local program like that, or how does that work?
So we don't have it. You're not going to be Henry Hill, and we're not going to move you to Arizona under an assumed identity. But we do have resources to relocate people, and we do have resources to move people and offer assistance. A lot of times people just say, hey, it's too hot here right now. Can you put me in a hotel for a couple of weeks? We're happy to do that. We're also happy to assist people to relocate and move out of neighborhoods. And, obviously there's a lot of expenses associated with moving and uprooting. And so we have resources to help with that. I know the prosecutor's office has been involved in that. I know IMPD has been involved in that. One of the most important things to us is making sure that we're always able to protect our witnesses. We feel very fortunate. We do have some resources to help with that. I want to calibrate expectations. You're not going to have an assumed identity in another state. But we can help you move. We can help you with some of the costs that are associated with being involved in a criminal case. And those are resources that we routinely offer to people when they have information that's helpful. And we do think that they might need to be called to testify as a witness.
Nate, I was just going to add to that. Yeah, I think Prosecutor Mears summed it up good. Just one other resource that he mentioned that don't want to get away. So, people can always call Crime Stoppers and report information. A lot of people don't understand how Crime Stoppers works. They think it's through the police department. It is not. Your information when you call Crime Stoppers is sent all the way to Canada, scrubbed at any identifying information, and then sent back to the local office, which is assigned a randomized number. That's how they track the tip. That's how if there's a reward associated with that tip. The prosecutor talked about we call it VWAP, which is the Victim Witness Assistance Program. It's not a protection program, as Prosecutor Mears alluded to, but we do have dollars dedicated to both the prosecutor's office and IMPD to help victims through the challenges that may come with either testifying or just last month, both prosecutor's office and our office used dollars to get a victim back here that had moved away. She was a sexual assault victim, and so she moved away with family. And we were able to get her back here with the detective and the deputy prosecuting attorney to testify, which resulted in the conviction of the suspect. So I say all that to say there are dollars out there to do that, but the prosecutor is right. It's not a protection program, and often what you find, Nate, is, I hear it all the time. People say, well, why don't you have a protection program? And Prosecutor Mears said it best. I mean, when you talk to people and you say, hey, would you testify in this trial? Would you think about moving away? Well, people don't want to change their lives. They don't want to move away from family. I mean, we're not, the feedback we get from people is I'm not willing to do that. So, we've modified our program to try to fit our community's needs, and our assistance program that you have has done it for the last 3 or 4 years. And we've got dollars dedicated to doing that. So if someone comes forward and they're part of a case that we need to either get them temporary housing or even potentially get them relocating fees, we can do that.
Well, the next issue that relevant is teen violence. One of my concerns is that there's not a week that goes by that I look on TV and there's some teenagers shooting some other teenagers. We have a lot of aggressive misconduct among the younger generation now, particularly African-American in our community. And first, I'll talk to Chief Adams. What, if anything, can be done to stem the tide of this type of misconduct in our community? And because a long time ago, I worked with the mayor's office to try to start a summer job program, and he did. He put $5 million, and we have a good summer job program. The idea is that we want the kids doing something productive during the summertime, which we have an uptick in violence, right? And but what else can be done? Because now it become political football now, and we get a distorted view of finger pointing. We say that, certain administrators are doing a terrible job, police doing a terrible job. And what is the fix, Chief Adams?
Yeah, great question. I think first thing is we need to partner with schools. I mean, these kids typically are in schools or in some alternative program. But two, we need to have deep conversations about conflict resolution that include social media. And I think that's where, it's difficult, right? Because you have an older generation that doesn't really understand social media to some degree. You have a younger generation that's primarily how they communicate. I can't tell you the number of times where, we've put a case together to present to the prosecutor's office based on what we found on social media. And what you find is the argument, the disagreement, the disrespect starts on social media, and then it dwarfs to, someone being shot or someone being injured. So, I think, we need to have continued investments in programs. One of the programs that I really amplify, and there are many, but this is one program that I know is doing the work, and that's Voices. And the reason I say that is because they're working with a population that most of us can't. The reality is most of us in our positions, we can work with a kid that may occasionally get in trouble, right? May occasionally be disrespectful. We can typically work with a kid like that. But, there is an underlining of kids that are really dysfunctional for a number of reasons, whether it be, broken home, whether it be they've been abused themselves and now it's manifested themselves. That's the population, and it's a small population, but that's the population most of us can't reach. They're very disrespectful. They are used to fighting. They are used to shooting. And so places like Voices works with that population. So we need to continue to invest in programs that really get to the root of the issue, which is conflict resolution and how to appropriately, display anger, or appropriately how to deal with emotions. And so, I think it's a three-pronged approach. We need to continue to work with schools. We need to continue to encourage schools not to kick kids out, right? Because when they're kicked out or expelled, for example, they're left to their own devices. And so we need to have alternatives for kids that are certainly, we don't want them in general population. We understand that because it can be very disruptive, but we need to find an alternative. And then secondly, we need to invest in conflict resolution, programs like Peace Learning Center, Voices, and then we need to invest in just conversations around how we appropriately handle social media. And again, the reason I say social media is because unlike when I was coming up, social media was around, but I wasn't really learning a lot from social media. But today, kids are learning from Instagram. They're learning the images, and so their brains are not really developed enough that they know what to do with those negative images. So that's why I say social media needs to be a part of the equation.
Well, Prosecutor Ryan, man, that was a lot of information that Chief just gave us, but let's break down the prosecutorial side of it. We have a juvenile court system that deals with this, but let's talk first about the juvenile system and how you go about administering justice in the juvenile system to try to slow the violent crimes.
So I think when we talk about violence in young people, the number one filed case in Marion County in juvenile court is dangerous possession cases. And what that means is it's someone less than 18 years of age with a gun. That's the number one case we're filing. And to make this conversation go full circle, we have seen a significant uptick in the number of kids that we have seen possessing firearms, and we can trace it back to permitless carry. Because we've got so many people constantly walking around with guns. They're leaving them in their cars. They're leaving them in their homes. They're leaving them in areas that are exposed, and kids are stealing them. And then they end up with those guns. The other thing is, as Chief Adams mentioned, is these kids rely on and use social media and the internet for everything. And it's entirely too easy to buy guns in the state of Indiana. And so if you want to buy a gun, you're just going to get on Instagram. You're just going to get on Facebook. You're just going to get on whatever your preferred social media app is, and you're going to find a firearm that you can buy. And so those are the types of the challenges that we're facing. Is it's never been easier for young people to get guns. It's reflected in the numbers in terms of what we're prosecuting. And so that's the part that's a huge challenge. because when these kids have guns, they have a propensity to use them because they're young people who are not the best at making decisions under ideal circumstances. But when you add in a lot of times what these fights are over, which is nonsense, but people get fired up about different things. We see too much violence involving young people. I agree with Chief Adams about the work that needs to be done with the schools. Chief and I just this week on Thursday met with all the different police chiefs and all the different individuals who are responsible for discipline in schools in Marion County. Some of the superintendents were there as well, trying to come up with things. What can we do to try to help? When kids are in these schools, how can the prosecutor's office, how can IMPD be helpful in making sure that we create a safe environment for kids to learn in? Those are the types of things that we're really focused on, is really trying to integrate ourselves in these schools. We don't want to have to file cases against young people. Inevitably, there are going to be times and situations where it's 100% appropriate, and we're happy to file those charges and we're happy to file those cases. But for us, we also want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to try to help these young people navigate life and make sure that they're not making some poor choices. So for instance, we're going to be actually in Tech High School once a week, and we being the prosecutor's office, and just having those conversations with young people about what we can do to help. How can we be a resource to these young people who are going through some really trying times? As Chief Adams said, there's this huge problem of, hey, you disrespected me on social media, therefore I must shoot you. How do we break that cycle? How do we help people have better conflict resolution skills, but also how do we create leaders in our schools who can stand up and say, that's not the way to resolve your problem? Chief can say it, I can say it, Nate Lee can say it, but if it's one of your friends who's in the school who's telling you that's not the way to go, that's more powerful. So what can we do to try to help develop leaders in our community? One of the things that we spend a lot of time on is every year we do our youth violence prevention fellows, who are kids from all around Marion County, and we bring them together and we try to build leadership skills, but we also try to figure out what are the issues that are impacting young people and how can we best serve as a resource to work with young people. And what we have found is the number one source of kids' problems and drama is directly related to social media. And so we as an agency and we as a community need to be able to adapt and adjust to the fact that this is how kids are communicating. This is how kids are learning. This is how kids are engaging in commerce. And we have to be able to adjust to the fact that that's how they are now living their life. And it's really telling that kids have never spent more time on social media and they've never been more unhappy. And so what can we do to try to help break that cycle that seems to result in a lot of unnecessary violence in our community? But we cannot overlook the fact that, again, it comes down to the easy accessibility of guns in the state of Indiana. And when you have so many people walking around with guns, people misplace them. They leave them in their cars, they get stolen, and they wind up in the hands of young people. And then Chief Adams and I are once again forced to prosecute those kids for breaking the law.
Well, Chief Adam, the prosecutor, gave some really good insight, but there's one big disconnect here: the parents, right? So what message can you communicate to parents who allow their children, these 15, 16, 17-year-old, to be carrying around guns? I mean, what liability, if any, do they face from a policeman standpoint? What are you planning to do about that, or what are you doing about it?
Well, and I want to take a moment to applaud Prosecutor Mears, in his office in terms of, when we find negligence with adults, particularly as it relates to guns, his office is filing those neglect charges for us. So, I think we have to continue to have the conversation with parents about, as Prosecutor Mears mentioned earlier, the accessible. I mean, just just what we expect in our community around guns. It's just the bar is very low, as you said. I mean, you see it at grocery stores, you see it at gas stations. I mean, it's just becoming commonplace. But where the rubber meets the road is parents have to be responsible with guns and juveniles. You can't just go home, put it on a table, and allow, your child to have easy access to that gun. So, we have to continue to educate parents about, the proper storage and handling of guns and the consequences when we can prove that they were negligent. I think we have to continue to have a strong sense of if there's some negligence there, you could potentially face charges. Now, again, I'm not saying that every parent that has a gun that their child was injured was due to negligence. Some of it's just unfortunate. But when we can, and our detectives are looking at these cases, trying to discover evidence that would support neglect, we are going to present that to the prosecutor's office, at least for consideration. So, strong enforcement, strong education, and then, again, because as Prosecutor Mears and you've alluded to, Nate, think about this. You get a gun here in Indiana, there's no education to that. I mean, there's literally nothing. It's, hey, here's a gun. And we've seen accidental shootings go up some 30% since the passage of the law. People accidentally shooting themselves because everybody's going out to get a gun. So, parents have a responsibility to educate themselves. I mean, there are plenty of resources in our community around, how to properly handle a gun, how to properly store a gun, because we don't want to see, children injured or much, much worse die because of the negligence of parents. So, Nate, I'll sum it up with this. We will continue to look at cases where children accidentally shoot themselves or negligently shoot themselves to see if there's potential evidence for, consideration of criminal charges against the parents. We will continue to educate parents on the proper storage and proper handling of handguns. And then lastly, parents have to take responsibility and secure their weapons so that children can't get to them. They can't be stolen. They have a responsibility to do that.
Prosecutor Mears, as relate to the parents, what message can you articulate to the parents in terms of preventing their teen kids from possessing these weapons, and what consequences do they face?
So I feel like I've given a lot of statistics today, but here's another one. We've never filed more neglect cases involving guns than we have in 2023, and the year's not over yet. And again, it's just a symptom of this problem of too many people having access to firearms who probably shouldn't be having guns. A gun is an incredible responsibility that needs to be taken care of. It needs to be cared for. It needs to be managed. And there's just too many people in our community who don't do that. And as a consequence, we have filed multiple cases against parents and adults and guardians where they have not properly stored their firearm, and kids have been able to get a hold of it. And the kids have either been involved in maybe an accidental shooting, or they've been involved in a crime, and now the parent is on the hook for criminal liability. And so I think that's the first thing that parents need to understand is we will file those charges because ultimately at the end of the day, you are responsible. If you're going to bring a gun into your home, you are responsible for ultimately who uses that gun and have a responsibility and an obligation to keep that gun away from a young person. And so I think that's the first part of this. The other part, and the other conversation about parents, is parents just need to take ownership of the fact that they need to parent their kids. And when I'm in the community and we're having conversation with people, I think there's a lot of people in the community who would very much appreciate seeing parents be more proactive with their own children. Because we see when parents don't do that, we see the impact it has on schools, we see the impact it has in neighborhoods, and we see the impact that it has on the criminal justice system. And so the other part of it is it's okay to tell your kids no, and it's okay to set ground rules for your kids. And that's one of the things that I think we also need to talk about is, the solution to all these problems are not the police department or the prosecutor's office. It starts in the home in terms of people doing things to help set their kids up to be successful. And so I think that's the other part I hope nobody loses sight of. Yes, we will prosecute you. Detective Adams has a lot of investigators who are investigating these cases, and we filed more of those cases this year than we ever have before. But these are all preventable instances if parents do what they're supposed to do in terms of properly storing the firearm, but also making sure that they're an active component of their kid's life and making sure they're setting expectations where walking around with a gun is something that the parent is not going to tolerate, so it never makes its way to the police department or the prosecutor's office.
And one thing I need to tell parents, you need to write this down. We've successfully sued parents for allowing their kids to have guns that cause injuries. So we've done it all the time. You have civil liability attaches when you have a gun that your kid use and you don't store it correctly. Now, one final point that I want to cover today, that is that I watch these mayors, these ads, and I'm disturbed by some of them. I watched the Shreve team, they portray these African-American on TV and they're dissatisfied with crime in our community. And it kind of bothered me because I then investigated Shreve himself. I looked at his company and no diversity, and just troubled me that you just make these fake ads, go out and I guess pay or gets people to make these commercials. But let's talk, Chief, about diversity efforts within the department. You've been a trailblazer. You know, I started representing the department back in '85 to increase the diversity within the police department. Back then, we had certain type protocol that led to a lot of misconduct of police officers, particularly on African-American males in the community. What efforts have the police department done under the current leadership to make sure that we have a more diverse department? What efforts are you undertaking?
Well, Nate, first of all, you're exactly right. Thank you. You've been a trailblazer yourself in terms of keeping the voice of concern about diversity for law enforcement here, specifically as it relates to IMPD, even having filed lawsuits against the city and the police department to push that agenda. So unfortunately, Nate, we still struggle. I mean, that is just the reality that we live in. I think when I came on, you know, Black and brown police officers made up about 15 to 16%, and today we make up about the same, maybe a little bit higher, 18%. So it continues to be a struggle for the police department. Now, having said that, since 2020, 2021, 2022, this is not a very popular profession to be in right now. So that's no excuse. That's just the reality. And I give this analogy all the time. When I came on the police department in 1997, I was competing against 3,000 applicants, 3,000 for 50 spots. Today, we're lucky if we get 700. And so, you know, the numbers for African Americans or Black and browns is even lower. So my point is, and, you know, that's why pay and benefits, all those things are important, because the pool is much smaller and we're competing against agencies like Fishers and Carmel and Plainfield and state police now that have a pay scale much higher than ours. So the reality is we've got a lot of work to do. We just came out of a campaign ad where we hit Black radio, we hit Black TV, we hit Black newspapers. We have Commander Ida Williams, who runs our recruiting program. And we just need to continue to be innovative. I know one of the things that we do is Women Behind the Badge. We need to make our profession appealable to, you know, young mothers, right? Who may not have a structured home that would support, you know, working late shift, for example. So we need to continue to be innovative. We need to continue to look to, you know, I would say the kids we're recruiting now today, it's about relationships. It's not like when I first got on, you know, hey, this is a job. You know, I figure I'm gonna be here for 30 years. You know, these kids, they're okay with coming to IMPD for 2 or 3 years and going somewhere else. That's just their mentality. But I would say that more than anything, they're worried about relationships. What can you do for me? Do you care about for me? Do you hear me? And so we need to continue to invest in our recruiting. Right now, we have 2 recruiters. We're developing a plan to get more recruiters on a temporary basis to get more applicants. But we have to continue to recruit, and we have to continue as a community to make this job likable or make this job attractive, because right now it's not. When I talk to some of my colleagues across the state and ask them, what are you hearing from Black and Brown? They're hearing the same thing I hear. Why would I want to go into law enforcement right now? You guys are getting shot at. Nobody really likes you. So I'm gonna go over here to college and then join IMPD. Yeah, I just don't see, and the pay's low. I just don't see that connection. So my point is, we as a community have a responsibility. We say we want a diverse police department, and certainly the police department has to own that. But we as a community have to own that as well. We as a community have to say that, hey, you have an opportunity to come back and serve your community in law enforcement. So I would encourage you to think about IMP. And then lastly, I think Chief Taylor's done a good job at what he can control. As we've talked many times, Chief Taylor can appoint from lieutenant and above. And so the appointed ranks, which are major, commander, deputy chief, assistant chief, we are very diverse, upwards of 30-40% in terms of the what we call the appointed staff. That's what the chief can directly control. So as you know, he's an African American. You have 4 deputy chiefs, 2 of which are African American. You have 7 commanders, 4 of which are African American, and then you have 2 majors. So again, he's that part of it. We're doing well, but where we struggle is recruiting. So, or not recruiting, but where we struggle is the sworn officer, the officers on the street. So whatever folks can do to help us, we've changed our processes, we've shortened them. We have a PAR program where we try to get applicants ready for the process prior to actually applying. We have a community day where we bring in community members talking about what the profession looks like to potential applicants. We even have daycare for that particular session to make sure that our female applicants have the support they need to be able to hear that message. So again, we're talking with Commander Williams about a campaign with the historically Black colleges in the region, and talking with the historically Black fraternities and sororities about a program maybe to launch to encourage people of color to consider law enforcement. But just a number of things. I just think we need to continue to keep that drumbeat going. It's been elusive, and I'm hopeful that in the next few years that we can continue to close that gap.
Well, thank you. One final point of departure for the prosecutor. One other thing I neglected to talk about earlier that I omitted, the criminal justice system was adversely impacted by COVID-19. We all know that. What are you doing now to get rid of the backlog of cases, particularly like the homicide cases, try to get those matters resolved? So it became a safety issue when we saw this sheriff deputy killed by an inmate, and it was a sad day, I thought, because it was clear to me that the sheriff department, like the police department, like the personnel, so what has been done now to get rid of that backlog of cases?
Well, I feel like we're in probably the best position we've been in a long time as it relates to our case numbers. Last year, we disposed of more cases than we filed, which we had not done the previous couple of years because of COVID, which indicates that we're starting to finally get through that backlog of cases that kind of sat there between 2020 and 2021. We've done a ton of jury trials, more jury trials than I think we've done in the last 5 or 6 years. to kind of try to work through those number of cases. And so really what it came down to was just allocating the personnel to make sure that we had people in the courtroom who could get those cases resolved. The court changed how they structured things. Most importantly, they gave us another additional major felony court. And so now, because you have we did have 8 major felony courts, now we have 9, which gives us the opportunity to resolve more cases because there's another judge who's more proactively hearing those cases. So on the more serious cases and on the more violent cases, we're in a better position than we've been in because of really the cooperation between the public defender agency, the prosecutor's office, and the courts to prioritize those cases and then also create a new court. Obviously, when you create a new court, the public defender has to staff that, the prosecutor's office has to staff that. And we were able to do that. But it was a lot of hard work from a lot of different people to be able to address that challenge.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank our VIP guest today, our superstar Marion County prosecutor, and then Chief Adam. Thank you so much for participating in the show today. And a final comment, a lot of my close friends, you know, some of the ministers that are good friends of mine and clients, you had called for the ouster of the chief of police, which I disagree with. And because I want to give a highlight as to why this was important, because I've been working on this since 1985 to make sure that we have a better diversity within the police department. And I don't think that most people realize that we have the most diverse department in the upper level than we've ever had in the history of cities. Things that I fought for, I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to achieve. And so I don't want us to go in reverse on this issue. I think that we need to continue to move forward on the issue of diversity. I think it's important for our community. And we have a great prosecutor who works hard every day to try to make sure he has a diverse staff. And we also have the same thing with the police department. So don't get blindsided by these negative commercials, you know, because we see that the issue of crime is not a problem that caused by the police or the prosecutor. It's citizen. We all have a role in this process. Parents, we have to do a better job of making sure our kids don't carry guns to school and other places. Social media, we find out our chief is a big part of it. So there's a lot of dynamics. And so when we start seeing political commercials and just with this blame game, remember the things we talked about today, folks. And don't forget, though, make sure you get registered to vote. And the next election is going to be the most important one during your lifetime, like every election. So we start early voting real soon. And don't forget the message we talked about today. Thank you. May God bless and keep you until next week. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, Nate.
Thanks, Nate.